Does anyone else need to get something to drink? Because I'm going to read mine now.
Okay.
We're going into fathers. I'm going to read mine about my father, and then Elizabeth is going to read hers about her father.
Her father. If we're going into,
And then,
you are going into fathers.
We're going into fathers.
and then I read mine too. Eventually I get to read mine.
You're not leaving yet.
No, I
Would you hold
got
my
my,
hand?
I got my,
Hold my hand while I go.
absolutely.
That's
No, I got my little book for.
Are you going to read
Yes, I don't think I formally signed up, but we talked about it.
Oh, good. So, you're going to read something. Is it about your father or is it about everything?
He can do it about everything.
Everyone get something to drink. Turn off your
Look,
cell phone.
he's got an attaché
This
case.
isn't a
This is going to be
The
serious.
attaché.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I need my ginger back here.
Is
My
it,
Rizzo.
is it top secret? I was in an airport, right, in Hong Kong.
The Rizzo is a bulb under there.
I was in an airport in Hong Kong, right, 7 a.m. in the morning waiting for it.
Oh, really? God.
And there two flight attendants walked by.
This is
and
a
the
Rizzo.
attaché case, top secret, top secret.
Do you all know what a Rizzo is?
Oh, dear goodness.
What is the reason?
Oh, we have a Minerva, we have a Minerva anatomy lecture. Every,
No,
every,
botanical lecture.
every-
I don't know botany.
every human being comes with one of these. You see? And they take them out at death so you don't know you have this inside of you.
You have to hit it with gingerly.
That's right.
I changed the title of my reading, which was going to be The Rhizome Remains, but I changed the title to Walking in My Father's Shoes. And the reason I changed the title is that I looked up the complete quote of Carl Jung about the rhizome, and I changed the title. Then I went across the street to get tomatoes and onions and limes, and I saw this huge rhizome. The gingers are rhizome, as are irises. And those are things that grow under the ground and shoot up stalks that die yearly, but the rhizome remains. So I'm going to read first Carl Jung's introduction to memories, dreams, and reflections, part of it. And there'll be parts of my reading where I'll have to interrupt and go to somebody's notebooks or various other things, okay? So walking in my father's shoes, and I'm starting with Carl Jung's statement. Life has always seemed to me like a plant that lives on its rhizome. Its true life is invisible, hidden in the rhizome. The part that appears above ground lasts only a single summer, then it withers away, an ephemeral apparition. When we think of the unending growth and decay of life and civilizations, we cannot escape the impression of absolute nullity. Yet I have never lost a sense of something that lives and endures underneath the eternal flux. What we see is the blossom which passes. The rhizome remains. Now, this is the next part, the beginning, is inspired by my reading of on Wikipedia about Rebecca West, her love affair with H.G. Wells, and the son, I forget his first name, West. And I thought at the time, you'll see what I thought about writers at the time, okay? Writers are an odd bunch in general, and mean, always getting even with their parents or their mates, attacking neighbors, friends, and enemies alike through language, taking on even their own gods, chopping to pieces and reconstructing to their own liking everything within sight, everything in their way, and eating up all the life surrounding them, only to produce countless words, endless volumes of text, paragraph after paragraph, poem after poem, chapter after chapter, book after book, all excreted in a constant stream of matter, continually being dropped into the environment and exuding a perfume stench that invites everyone to share the writer's madness. Worse, writers often confess, punishing themselves more furiously than they beat up on the enemy. And then, worst of all, writers are known to have slept with the enemy. Even the best of writers have done so. Maybe because they have thought about enmity so much and studied it so thoroughly in their writings that they have concluded that there can be no enemy at all if all are the enemy. I never thought of myself as a writer until recently. It surprised me a few years ago when my phrases and sentences when phrases and sentences began to form themselves in my mind as I slept at night. When I woke up, I could hardly wait to get to the computer. So I found myself scribbling things down on any scrap of paper I could find, copying the scribbles into the computer later in the day. As soon as I saw my words as text on the computer screen, typed and saved, I couldn't leave them alone. Cut and paste, delete, check a word out in the computer's dictionary. Is it the right word? I asked myself. The right verb tense? The right sentence structure to fit the idea? Try the thesaurus, I advised myself. Maybe there is a more precise word. Does this word mean what I think it means? I began to Google phrases to see if I was using them correctly. I checked my facts on Wikipedia. I read my text over and over again, making small changes, inserting new ideas, and deleting everything that distracted from what I wanted to say. I was compelled to use words with an urgency I had never had before, and the computer was my partner, helping me to reinvent myself. Eventually, I had a voice. So I joined them, the writers. I was one of them. Now I march in step with a huge army of avengers who ferret out the truths that try to hide themselves, pick at scabs until sores bleed again, reopen old wounds after they have healed themselves, inflict blows, slice across vast expanses of thin and tautly stretched consciousness in order to dig into the darkness within every human heart, all in the name of culture, and all for the good of mankind, and often in the name of the avant-garde for the supposed advancement of culture. My oldest sister, Cynthia, born Cornelia, disapproves. She wrote to me in April of this year. Hi, Minerva. I think that most of your latest biography is inappropriate. Why can't you just get on with life instead of living in the past? I do feel you are walking in Wally's shoes, trying to shock and be the center of attention. Cynthia. Now, Wally's my father. He was born Walter William Wharton, so he's known variously as Will Wharton, the poet, or Walter, or Wally, our father, or Wharton, which is going to be the quote from Tennessee Williams later on. Wharton, poor Wharton. Okay, later on. So, can I get a tissue for my nose, please? Wally, our father, in whose shoes Cynthia feels I am walking, was a poet-writer. His first book of poetry was published when he was 19 in 1928 in St. Louis. It is my understanding that the priests who taught him at the Christian Brothers College High School recognized his talent and helped him to publish May Harvest, a thin book of 41 pages. 1,000 copies were printed. This is in 1928 in St. Louis. 5 libraries have original copies of it listed online. There is 1 copy at the St. Louis Public Library and 1 at the main library here in New York. Somewhere I have a Xerox copy of it. So I want to, and this is a draft, I want to put in his poem about Ireland. His mother, Mary Elizabeth Walsh, had been born in Tipperary, and so there are some poems about Ireland, even though he was born in St. Louis in 1908. Wally's legacy as a writer is tainted by alcoholism, bursts of anger, and the embarrassment that he caused everyone around him. But he does have 2 linear feet of a legacy in the archives of the Missouri Historical Society, unpublished manuscripts and correspondence with other writers, including Jack Conroy and Nelson Algren. Wally wrote book reviews for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, as did Charles Gunther. In the 75 linear feet of papers in the Charles Gunther collection in the archives of St. Louis University, which is a Catholic university, and Gunther was a Catholic, one will find correspondence between Gunther and countless American writers. In Gunther's papers, there are many letters from my father, Wally. Okay. Wally is a footnote in several biographies of Tennessee Williams, who was going to Washington University at the time in St. Louis. Wally secured the bootleg liquor during Prohibition that he and Tennessee Williams drank together when they were young men in St. Louis, and Williams was a student at Washington University. Now, in notebooks, Tennessee Williams, page 59, my father is mentioned, he's referred to as Wharton. And this is what Tennessee Williams, as a very young man, thought of the literati or literary people, including what he thought of my father, okay? Okay, so October 1st, Tennessee Williams. The first morning in October will have to go on record as one of the world's worst. I am disgraced at home and disgusted with the world, especially literary people. Sick at my stomach. Never spent such a nauseous night. I no longer have any trust in human nature. Honestly, I had better live the life of an anchorite than go with such people. Selfish, egotistical, vulgar, absurd. All that I said about McBurney after the Chicago trip was true. He is really an ass. Poor Wharton. Poor Wharton is simply nuts. And I am a damn fool to tolerate such a bunch. That's Tennessee Williams referring to my father. He did, there's a writing by a woman where my father got the bootleg liquor, brought it over, and the parents were gone, and the sister got very upset and called the parents. And when the parents came, Tennessee Williams said to his sister, "I wish you had never been born," and he regretted it terribly. So I think he held that a bit against my father for having brought the bootleg liquor. They had a way of putting it into cups and making it look like it was tea. Right? Anyway, Wally had leftist leanings. He was never a Communist Party member because he wasn't considered trustworthy. Lucky him. Shortly after he was expelled from the leftist John Reed Club in St. Louis in 1934, I know you love this. Wally composed spontaneous satires on the Communist Party's orthodoxy, reciting his verse in bars, infuriating Nelson Algren, but pleasing the Falonites. The Falonites were a bunch of Irish thugs who worked in the mills and hung out together getting drunk and beating up people and all that. The Falonites, a gang of rowdy East St. Louis mill workers, would-be proletarian writers. Jack Conroy, author of The Disinherited and publisher of The Anvil, was also pleased by Wally's verse, but couldn't show that he was, for fear of offending local communists who followed the party line. Here is an example of my father's political satire. The title is "Left-Wing Reviewer Regrets Unfortunate Review." So, "Oh, please stop the presses. It's the worst of all messes. I want to withdraw my review. I was told I should grovel in praise of some novel. I did, but now here's something new. The party's decided it must be derided." He's going to grovel for the novel, but now stop the presses because the party decided it has to be derided. Right, you got it. There are many of that if you read, I'll say, Wally's literary pranks are described in Douglas Wixon's 1994 critical study, Worker Writer in America, Jack Conroy and the Tradition of Midwestern Literary Radicalism, 1898-1990. Wixon refers to Jack Conroy as a disappeared writer, obscured by past associations with the radical left. Non-hierarchical, non-centrist, and egalitarian, Conroy published The Voices of Workers in The Anvil, a short-lived literary magazine in the Midwest in the early 1930s. Contributors included Erskine Caldwell, Langston Hughes, Richard Wright, Meridel Lasser, and of course Nelson Algren. Algren persuaded Conroy to move to Chicago in 1938 to revive The Anvil a few years after his demise at the hands of a forced merger with the Partisan Review, but the New Anvil failed. Wally's second book of poetry, Graffiti from Elsinore, was published in 1949 by a fine Midwestern publishing house, Decker Press, more than about 3 decades after the printing of his first book, Made Artist. Stanley Radulovic, a young artist of Serbian descent, supplied modernist illustrations for it. The New York Times reviewer dismissed it in one sentence. I think it is for the reason that Decker Press is highly respected in the book industry that Wally's book is still available online and as a fairly valuable item. As far as I know, there are no followers or fan clubs or young writers who value my father, so it has to be the prestige of Decker Press that has kept the dealers and collectors circulating his book. While the style of Radulovic's illustrations are dated, the illustrations add an allure. So now I go to another part later in life when I was a 19-year-old, okay? One Saturday afternoon in the summer of 1955, Jack Conroy visited my father, Wally, who was then living with Myrtle Dana in her house in Clayton, a suburb of St. Louis. My older sister, Alexandra, and I were also visiting. I was still a high school student. Myrtle, an alcoholic and childless widow, spent her weekdays drinking alone. When Wally came home from work, she drank with him. All weekend, they drank together. She owned a car that she never drove. She let Alexandra and me drive it. Sometimes we drove Wally to the A&P grocery store. Myrtle was a certain sort of American woman at that time, a childless alcoholic wife to an upper-class alcoholic man. before Bob Dana died of cirrhosis of the liver, Myrtle's duties had consisted of respecting her mother-in-law, managing her household help, and being a drinking companion to her husband. Last paragraph, okay? So Vadim says I should elaborate this, but Jack Conroy at that time was in his 50s and an older Irish-American from a mining family in Moberly, Missouri, and he had had this literary career, and my father was his friend, and they were getting back together to reminisce and all that, and they were in Myrtle's house, okay? So that Saturday in 1955, it was Wally and Conroy drinking together in Myrtle's kitchen. As I walked across the kitchen towards the back door and backyard, Wally and Conroy stood reminiscing while leaning on the sink with drinks in their hands. Jack Conroy was telling Wally how much I looked like him. As I stepped out the back door, I heard Conroy exclaim, "Why, Wally, she even walks like you." So I walk in my father's shoes. And I'm going to expand it with the criticism of my dear critic, Vadim. I like the first part most of all, where I criticize writers. Okay, I got it. Yeah. Okay, now next is, Elizabeth is going to do a father's post.
All right, so I gotta take a break.
Oh, take a break now?
Yeah.
How long did that go on? 20 minutes?
About
About
15.
Very entertaining.
Was it entertaining?
I love that.
I gotta put it in poem about Ireland, but I have to find it first.
I love it. I love all of
And
that.
I can put in
I love
one.
that history of American literature.
I know. The unknown American literature. Come on in and get drinks. We're taking a break from right here. And Elizabeth is going to be. And then when we go to the all down.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you. I have an iPhone 5. I want to take a picture of Minerva, but my phone ran out. A charger? You have a charger? A charger? I have a charger. I can put it, but that would go into the iPhone? I have a cable too. You have a cable that would go into the iPhone? I have one like, you have cable? I tell people about Minerva and Poland. Oh, good. It always, if it helps them.
I can't. You made it, right? From Woodstock?
Yeah,
You just took
I have my
pack
Wow.